which worked out well. If I had tried to make, I mean, I don't know how I could have tried to make up something commercial. I wasn't a particularly commercial comic book artist, so I just thought, well, yeah, let me just draw what I want to draw and see if see what happens.
That brings up a pretty.
And it had that name.
That brings up a pretty good point. That like some things are contrived by just one person, and some projects are built up from. You've been in the meetings and everything. There's probably 4 or 5 people that you got to get the okay from sometimes. What are the advantages to working on something that big? Do you like having full control, or do you like having advisors in there to?
Well, I lean pretty heavy on my editor these days because I'm very insecure. It's kind of a weird thing. I know what I'm doing, and I'm very confident in what I'm doing until I do it. Then I need somebody else to say it's okay. And as soon as they say it's okay, then I go, yeah, that really is good. But I need a sounding board for all my ideas. And my editor at Dark Horse has been great. He was the editor on, starting with the 3rd Hellboy story. I've had this young guy as my editor, and he's done a really good job of just questioning me about certain things. I've had editors in the past who really wanted you to do things their way. Mm-hmm. Maybe because I was probably the first guy this guy edited at Dark Horse. When he was young, he never really felt like he could go in there and tell me what to do because he hadn't really done it. But his job was just to kind of look and see if I was getting, my message across. The very first Hellboy story that he worked on, real early on, a story called The Corpse. And at the end of the story, Hellboy's supposed to chuck this dead body into a hole in the ground. And when he was given this assignment of editing this comic, my former editor told him, just, Mignola can't spell, so your main job is going to be correcting his spelling. But don't tell him what to do, or don't, it's an easy job. Open the envelope, fix his spelling, and push the thing through production. But he spotted that this hole in the ground didn't look like a hole in the ground. It looked like, when the Roadrunner puts down the black circle mm-hmm. that, on the ground, and then it turns into a hole. It was a black rectangle. It didn't look like a hole. So he pointed out to me that it didn't look like a hole, and he was right. And instead of, I think, as some people would, calling up the publisher and saying, fire this kid, he's telling me what to do, I appreciate the fact that that comic now looks better because I went back and fixed it. Because, my whole goal is to make this stuff as good as possible. Mm-hmm. So if somebody's got a suggestion for how to make it better, yeah, I want to listen.
Well, when you were doing your Hellboy, when the Hellboy movie was in production and everything, there must have been a lot of people that were asking you to compromise on certain things. Is that true? And if so, how did you deal with that? This is your very first, your own thing.
Well, Blade, I worked on Blade 2 with Guillermo before we did Hellboy, and that was much easier because I would draw stuff and he'd say, I don't like that, do this instead. Mm-hmm. It's a whole different thing when that's Hellboy.
Right.
When you come up something with the Hellboy movie and the director says, nah, we're going to do this instead, and you go, oh, that's weird. I'm used to being able to call the shots on my thing. And that situation became that much more difficult on the second picture because Guillermo really knew what he was doing. Mm-hmm. He had kind of taken those characters and made them his characters, which is fine, and I knew that intellectually, but psychologically, it becomes it's just very strange to work on somebody else's version of Hellboy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really weird. It was weird to be voted down in not even voted down, but just being told no on certain things. And there are certain things in there that I fought with him on, and I changed, or I got him to change. And there are other things that he just, for whatever reason, he said no. I need this to be like this, or this to be like that, and it's fine. And I appreciate that it's a completely different thing. And I'm not saying my ideas were better. It was just a process of being able to let go of the control I was used to having on something called Hellboy. So what I ended up with, especially after the second picture, is a weird feeling that I was visiting. I was visiting a Guillermo del Toro movie, and it didn't register that I was actually looking at characters I had created, because they were, it's so radically different. It's living people walking around wearing costumes that mostly I didn't recognize because they were so different than what I had done. And it wasn't until I remember on the second picture, Ron came on set, and he didn't have a shirt on. He was, as Hellboy with no shirt, wearing the coat, which is the way I draw him. But he didn't appear like that in the first picture. So when he walked out like that, I made a comment to somebody like, wow, that looks like my character. And somebody pointed out there were about 5 different characters on the set that I had created. Like they're all your characters. But they were Del Toro characters. So, that was a really interesting process.
Oh. Hey, was there any thought in, because when I first saw your comic books, when I first saw Hellboy, I was thinking that this would be a great 3D movie. Was there any thought to doing it like that instead of the live action?
Well, I think because Del Toro is a I'm not exactly sure what you mean 3D, but since Del Toro is a live action film guy, mm-hmm. That's what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. He wanted to do something animated also, but then Guillermo wants to do everything. So, but his main thing was to do live action. And quite frankly, I'm not a big animation guy, so I was much more interested in live action because it's so radically different than what I do, and I can kind of understand animation. And I'd seen animation. I'd done this picture of at Disney, so I'd been around that stuff, but I'd never been on a movie set. And the idea of actors walking around dressed up as my characters, that sounded a lot cooler to me. So yeah, I was very happy to do live action.
Did you get to keep any of the the props or the wardrobes or anything?
As kind of a parting gift on the first picture, I don't know that I'm supposed to have these things. I got like 1 bar of Nazi gold, so I've got this tiny little souvenir. And on the second picture, Guillermo did give me a couple very nice souvenirs. We walked onto the set, one of the sets on the second picture, where there's a scene where there's all these little tooth fairy creatures running around, and Hellboy rolls this giant statue and crushes a zillion of them. Mm-hmm. And when we walked onto the set, the statue, they'd already shot the scene, but the statue was still there with all these crushed little rubber tooth fairies stuck all over it. And Guillermo peeled one of those off and gave that to me and said, "Here, that's your souvenir." So yeah, I remember packing it very carefully in my luggage and wondering, what's customs going to say about this squashed rubber bug-looking thing that I'm trying to smuggle back into the country. So, and it's right here.
Wow.
That's a tooth fairy.
Let's raise that up a little bit. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It's really nasty.